The observation windows of the Galactic Council headquarters stretched across an entire wall, displaying the swirling colors of the Andromeda Nebula. Ambassador David Cole stood in the waiting chamber, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. In 3 minutes, he would walk through those massive doors and face the most powerful governing body in the known universe. Behind him, his assistant Rebecca Chin reviewed their prepared statements one final time. Though both knew the words might be useless once the session began. Earth had been part of galactic society for exactly 9 months. 9 months of careful diplomacy, cautious trade agreements, and walking on eggshells around civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel before humans had invented the wheel. Now all of that hung by a thread because of what happened on Station Kepler-442. The doors opened with a sound like distant thunder. David straightened his shoulders and walked forward into a chamber so vast that it created its own weather patterns. Clouds drifted near the ceiling, 3 kilometers above the floor. The air shimmered with translation fields that would convert his words into thousands of languages simultaneously. And everywhere he looked, alien beings watched him with eyes that ranged from curious to openly hostile. The Council of 12 sat on a raised platform that curved in a semicircle around the speaker's podium. Each member represented a major power block in galactic civilization. Some appeared vaguely humanoid. Others defied easy description. The chief counselor, a being named Xyler, whose species resembled floating masses of bioluminescent tendrils, pulsed with pale blue light as David approached the podium. Ambassador Cole of Earth. Xyler's voice emanated from translation devices built into the chamber walls. You stand before this council to answer charges of catastrophic negligence resulting in the deaths of 417 sentient beings. How does humanity respond? David gripped the edges of the podium. 417 dead. The number had haunted his dreams for the past week, ever since Station Kepler 442 suffered what the preliminary reports called a containment failure. What those reports didn't explain was how a simple diplomatic meeting had turned into a massacre. The human delegation responds with profound sorrow for the lives lost, David said, keeping his voice steady. However, we contest the characterization of negligence. Earth requests a full presentation of evidence before any judgment is rendered. A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled representatives. Several species made sounds that the translation fields rendered as disapproval. One of the council members, a massive creature whose rocky exoskeleton suggested a being made of living stone, leaned forward. You contest? You, whose species has barely mastered elementary fusion drives, contest the findings of this council's investigative teams? The translator identified the speaker as Counselor Dravik of the Stone Worlds Alliance. Your arrogance matches your ignorance, human. David forced himself to meet what he assumed were Dravik's eyes. With respect, Counselor, arrogance would be accepting blame for an incident we don't fully understand. The data we received shows that Station Kepler 442 suffered a cascade failure in its environmental systems 47 minutes after our delegation arrived. What it doesn't show is how our presence caused that failure. Chief Counselor Xyler's tendrils rippled in a pattern that might have indicated consideration. Very well, Ambassador. You shall have your evidence. The central display activated, showing a 3-dimensional model of Station Kepler-442. The station had been a marvel of engineering, a joint venture between 7 different species designed to facilitate diplomatic and trade relations. Its environmental systems could support life forms ranging from methane breathers to radiation feeders, all in carefully isolated zones connected by universal transit corridors. David watched the playback with growing horror. His delegation, consisting of 12 humans including himself, had been welcomed into Conference Chamber 7. Standard protocols were followed. Environmental scans showed all systems functioning normally. Then, at timestamp 47 minutes and 18 seconds. The first alarm triggered. The environmental barrier separating the human-compatible zone from an adjacent methane-breathing zone began showing stress fractures. Within 90 seconds, it collapsed completely. Methane flooded into oxygen-rich areas while oxygen contaminated methane zones. The resulting chemical reactions created fires, explosions, and toxic gas clouds that spread through 17 different sections before emergency systems could activate full lockdown. 417 beings died in those sections. They suffocated, burned, or succumbed to environmental incompatibility. The lucky ones died quickly. As you can see, Counselor Dravik rumbled, the cascade began in the section housing your delegation. Analysis of the environmental barrier shows molecular degradation, consistent with exposure to compounds found in human exhalation. David felt ice forming in his chest. You're saying we breathed on the barrier and it failed? We are saying, Chief Counselor Zyler corrected, that human respiratory byproducts contain trace elements that, over prolonged exposure, weaken the molecular bonds in the polymer compounds used in our environmental barriers. This is not common knowledge because humans are the first oxygen-breathing species to join the Council whose exhalation chemistry includes these specific compounds in significant quantities. Rebecca leaned forward and whispered urgently in David's ear. He nodded and addressed the Council again. Chief Counselor, if human exhalation can damage these barriers, why weren't we warned? Earth submitted complete biological and chemical data about our species during the application process. Surely this incompatibility would have been flagged. Another Council member spoke, a being whose crystalline body refracted light in dizzying patterns. The translator identified her as Counselor Siren of the Crystal Collective. The incompatibility was noted in preliminary screenings. However, calculations suggested that dangerous degradation would require continuous exposure over a period of no less than 10 standard days. Your delegation was scheduled for a 6-hour visit. The barrier should not have failed. Should not have, but did, Dravik said heavily, which suggests either our calculations were catastrophically wrong, or human biology is more dangerous than your submitted data indicated. David saw the trap closing. Either Earth scientists had provided false information, making humanity guilty of fraud, or human biology was inherently hazardous to galactic infrastructure, making them too dangerous to integrate into civilized society. Both paths led to the same destination, expulsion from the Council and possible quarantine of Earth itself. May I review the complete chemical analysis of the barrier failure? David asked, knowing he was grasping at straws, but seeing no other option. Chief Counselor Zyler's tendrils pulsed. The data is available through your podium interface. However, Ambassador, unless you possess advanced materials engineering expertise, I doubt you will find anything our specialists have missed. David accessed the data, his eyes scanning through chemical formulas and molecular diagrams that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to him. He had degrees in political science and international relations, not chemistry. But Rebecca had minored in biochemistry, and her sharp intake of breath told him she had spotted something. Ambassador, she whispered, pointing to a section of the analysis. Look at the degradation pattern. It's not uniform. David studied the highlighted area. The barrier had failed along a specific section, with damage radiating outward from a central point. If human exhalation had caused the failure through prolonged exposure, the damage should have been relatively uniform across the entire barrier surface. This looked more like something had struck the barrier at a specific location. Chief Counselor, David said slowly, his mind racing. Permission to ask a technical question? Granted. If human exhalation caused this failure over a 47-minute period, why does the damage pattern show a central impact point rather than uniform degradation. The chamber fell silent. Several council members exchanged glances that David couldn't interpret across species barriers. Chief Counselor Zeeler's bioluminescence flickered through several colors before settling back to pale blue. An astute observation, Zeeler admitted. Our specialists noted this anomaly. Their conclusion was that while human exhalation weakened the barrier overall, the actual failure occurred when one of your delegation members physically contacted the barrier, perhaps inadvertently during the conference. Who? David demanded. Which member of my delegation allegedly touched the barrier? More silence. Then Counselor Siren spoke, her crystalline voice chiming like bells. The security footage from that section was corrupted during the environmental cascade. We cannot definitively identify which human made contact. David felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. Corrupted footage. An anomalous damage pattern. A failure that occurred far faster than calculations predicted. This wasn't adding up to simple negligence anymore. I request access to all security footage from Station Kepler 442, David said. Not just from Conference Chamber 7, but from the entire station for the 6 hours preceding the incident. Denied, Counselor Draddick said immediately. Such footage contains sensitive information about other delegations and their activities. Then I request a formal independent investigation, David countered. Because if humanity is going to be held responsible for 417 deaths, I want absolute certainty that we actually caused them. The chamber erupted in noise as dozens of species reacted simultaneously. Chief Counselor Zeeler raised several tendrils, and silence gradually returned. Ambassador Cole, you tread dangerous ground. The Council does not appreciate having its investigative competence questioned. And humanity doesn't appreciate being blamed for a disaster without conclusive evidence. David shot back, knowing he was burning diplomatic bridges, but seeing no alternative. You show me corrupted footage, anomalous damage patterns, and calculations that don't match observed results, then expect me to accept guilt? That's not justice, Chief Counselor. That's a rush to judgment. He paused, then played his only remaining card. Earth has rights under the Galactic Charter. We're entitled to due process, including the right to examine all evidence and present alternative theories. Unless this Council has decided that the Charter doesn't apply to species you consider primitive. A calculated insult hung in the air like a challenge. David watched the Council members, trying to read alien body language and failing. He had just accused the most powerful governing body in the galaxy of hypocrisy and prejudice. It would either force them to grant his request or confirm that. They had already decided Earth's fate before the hearing began. Chief Counselor Zeeler's tendrils went completely still. A sign David had learned indicated deep thought in the Chief Counselor's species. This session is suspended, Zeeler announced. The Council will deliberate on Ambassador Cole's requests. You will be confined to the diplomatic quarters pending our decision. The podium descended into the floor, taking David with it. He caught a final glimpse of the vast chamber and its thousands of alien observers before the platform, delivered him to a waiting area beneath the council floor. Guards, members of a species whose 4 arms and massive builds made them ideal for security work, escorted David and Rebecca to quarters that were comfortable but clearly designed for confinement. Once alone, Rebecca turned to David with wide eyes. Sir, you just accused the Galactic Council of railroading us. They could declare Earth a rogue state and authorize military action. I know, David said quietly. But if we're going to be destroyed, I'd rather it be for standing up for ourselves than for meekly accepting blame we don't deserve. He moved to the window, which displayed a generated view of Earth from orbit. Something isn't right about this, Rebecca. That damage pattern, the corrupted footage, the rush to judgment. Someone wants humanity blamed for what happened on that station. But who? And why? David shook his head. That's what we need to figure out, because our survival might depend on it. The diplomatic quarters were luxurious by any standard, but David felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. He stood by the window, watching simulated clouds drift across the generated image of Earth, while Rebecca worked at the room's communication terminal. 3 hours had passed since the council suspended the session, and the silence from the deliberation chamber felt ominous. "I've got something," Rebecca said suddenly, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The station's public records are still accessible. They show that Conference Chamber 7 underwent maintenance 2 days before our delegation arrived. David moved to stand behind her, studying the data scrolling across the display. What kind of maintenance? Environmental barrier inspection and certification. The work was performed by a contractor called Viridian Systems Engineering. Rebecca pulled up more files. But here's the interesting part. Viridian Systems isn't listed in the station's approved contractor database. They were brought in as a special exception, authorized by someone with high-level administrative access. Can you trace who authorized it? Rebecca's expression darkened. The authorization code belongs to Counselor Dravik. The implications hit David like a physical blow. Dravik, the Stone World's counselor who had been most aggressive in blaming. Humanity had personally authorized contractors to work on the very barrier that failed. That couldn't be coincidence. "We need to tell someone," Rebecca said. "This proves there's more to the incident than human negligence." "Tell who?" David asked bitterly. "The council?" "Dravik is one of them. For all we know, other members are involved." He paced the room, his mind working through possibilities. We need proof of what really happened. Hard evidence that even the council can't ignore. His communication device chimed with an incoming message. David checked the source and frowned. The signal was encrypted using protocols he didn't recognize, and the sender was identified only as concerned observer. He opened the message. Text appeared in English, which itself was unusual, since most galactic communications used the universal translation format. "Ambassador Cole, you are correct to question the official narrative. The incident at Station Kepler 442 was not an accident, and humanity was not responsible. However, proving this will require access to data that the Council has classified. If you wish to clear your species' name, meet me in Observation Deck 12 in 1 hour. Come alone and tell no one. This communication will delete itself in 30 seconds. David read the message twice before it vanished from the screen. Rebecca had seen it too, her face pale with worry. "It's obviously a trap," she said. "Sir, you can't go." "If I don't go, we might never know the truth." David checked his chronometer. 1 hour. That gives me time to prepare. Prepare how? You're confined to quarters. The guards won't let you wander the station. David smiled grimly. The guards are there to keep threats out and make sure we don't access sensitive areas. But diplomatic quarters have always had certain courtesies, even in confinement. I'm allowed to move freely within the non-restricted zones of the diplomatic sector. Observation Deck 12 is in that sector. And if this mysterious contact tries to kill you, then you'll have proof that something very wrong is happening. And you can take that to the media outlets covering the council session. Earth's delegation. Dying under mysterious circumstances would raise questions even the council couldn't suppress. He squeezed her shoulder. But I don't think they want to kill me. If they did, there are easier ways. No, someone wants to help us, or at least wants to use us for their own purposes. Either way, it's more than we have now. 57 minutes. Later, David walked through the quiet corridors of the diplomatic sector. The guards had indeed allowed him to pass without challenge, though they watched carefully to ensure he stayed within permitted areas. The station's architecture was a blend of functional design and artistic expression, with walls that shifted, colors based on ambient light, and air circulation systems that created gentle breezes mimicking planetary weather. Observation Deck 12 was smaller than the main council chamber, but still impressive, with transparent walls offering a view of the nebula and the scattered stars of local space. David entered to find the deck apparently empty. He was about to turn back, thinking he had been deceived, when a voice spoke from the shadows near the far wall. "Ambassador Cole, thank you for coming." A figure stepped into the light. David recognized the species, if not the individual, a Valerian, one of the insectoid races known for their advanced technology and neutral political stance. The being's compound eyes reflected the nebula's colors, and its four arms gestured in a pattern that David's cultural training identified as a greeting. "Who are you?" David asked. "My name is Telvin. I serve as a junior analyst in the Council's Technical Assessment Division. I was part of the team that investigated the station Kepler 442 incident." Telvin's mandibles clicked in what might have been anxiety. "What I am about to tell you could cost me my position and possibly my life. But I cannot remain silent while an innocent species is condemned for crimes they did not commit." David felt his pulse quicken. "What do you know?" Telvin activated a portable data device, projecting holographic images into the air between them. The official investigation concluded that human exhalation degraded the environmental barrier. This conclusion is false. I performed independent analysis of the barrier fragments, and the degradation pattern is inconsistent with chemical exposure over time. The hologram showed molecular structures that meant little to David, but Telvin highlighted specific areas. This damage was caused by a directed energy weapon calibrated to disrupt the polymer bonds at a molecular level. Someone shot the barrier with the specific intent of causing it to fail. "Can you prove this?" "The evidence exists in the full spectroscopic analysis of the barrier fragments. However, that data was classified by order of Chief Counselor Zeiler. Only the summary conclusions were included in the official report." Telvin's compound eyes seemed to study David carefully. "I am giving you a copy of the complete analysis. If you can present this to the Council in open session, they cannot ignore it." David took the data crystal Telvin offered. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from helping humanity?" "Justice," Telvin said simply. "I joined the Council's service because I believed in the principles it claimed to uphold. Fairness, truth, protection of all sentient species, regardless of their technological level or political power. But this incident has shown me that those principles are negotiable when powerful interests are at stake." "What interests? Who benefits from blaming humanity?" Telvin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of distress. "I do not have all the answers. But I can tell you this. Councillor Dravik has significant investments in Viridian Systems Engineering, the contractor that performed maintenance on the barrier. If it becomes known that faulty maintenance caused the disaster, Dravik would face financial ruin and likely removal from the Council. Far better, from his perspective, to blame a weak newcomer species that cannot effectively defend itself." David felt anger burning in his chest. 417 beings died, so Dravik could avoid accountability for cutting corners on safety? "I believe the deaths were not intended. The energy weapon was likely meant to create a minor breach that would be blamed on human incompatibility, forcing Earth to pay compensation and accept restrictions. But the weapon operator miscalculated the barrier's weakened state from the faulty maintenance. The result was catastrophic." Telvin gestured with two of his four arms. "Again, I cannot prove this theory, but the technical evidence supports it." David studied the data crystal in his hand. "If I present this in the Council session, they'll know it came from an insider. You'll be exposed." "Yes," Telvin agreed. "That is why I ask, that you wait until the moment when the Council is preparing to vote on humanity's fate. Make it public in the most dramatic way possible. Force them to address the evidence in front of all the assembled species. In that environment, they cannot simply dismiss it or silence me before I testify. You would testify? Publicly support your analysis? I would, though I suspect I will not be the only one. There are others in the Council bureaucracy who have doubts about this case. If you show courage in confronting the Council, some of them may find their own courage to speak. Telvin moved toward the exit. I must go. We should not be seen together. Remember, wait for the right moment. Premature revelation will only give Dravik time to prepare counter-arguments. After Telvin left, David remained in the observation deck, turning the data crystal over in his hands. He had evidence now, but using it required perfect timing and nerves of steel. If he misjudged the moment, Earth could still face condemnation. His communication device chimed. A message from Rebecca. Council session resuming in 2 hours. Chief Counselor has announced they will render judgment today. David looked out at the nebula, gathering his thoughts. 2 hours until humanity's fate was decided. 2 hours to prepare for the most important moment of his diplomatic career. He contacted Rebecca with a coded message they had prepared for emergencies. Begin. Protocol Omega. Her response came immediately. Confirmed. Recording all communications and preparing data for emergency broadcast. Protocol Omega was Earth's insurance policy. If the Council condemned humanity despite exculpatory evidence, Rebecca would transmit everything they had discovered to every media outlet, an independent observer in galactic civilization. It wouldn't save Earth from immediate consequences, but it would create enough doubt about the Council's integrity to potentially shift public opinion. David returned to the diplomatic quarters and found Rebecca had prepared his formal ambassador's uniform. He dressed carefully, knowing that appearance mattered in these situations. Humans might be considered primitive by galactic standards, but they understood the power of symbols and presentation. Are you ready for this? Rebecca asked quietly. No, David admitted. But ready or not, it's time to find out if humanity has a future in galactic civilization. The walk back to the Council chamber felt longer than before. The corridors were crowded with observers, journalists, and curious beings from dozens of species, all wanting to witness the judgment. David heard whispers as he passed, translation devices converting alien languages into fragments of English. The human ambassador? They say the evidence is conclusive. Earth will be quarantined for certain. He pushed through the crowd and entered the vast chamber. The gallery was packed even more densely than before, with some species literally hanging from the ceiling structures to get a view of the proceedings. The Council of 12 waited on their raised platform, and David noted that Counselor Dravik appeared particularly satisfied. Chief Counselor. Xyler's tendrils pulsed with pale blue light as David took his position at the speaker's podium. Ambassador Cole. The Council has completed its deliberation regarding your requests for additional investigation. We have determined that the existing evidence is sufficient for judgment, and that further investigation would serve only to delay justice for those who died in the incident. David gripped the podium. Chief Counselor, I must protest. Your protest is noted and overruled, Xyler continued. However, before we render judgment, the Council will allow you to make a final statement on behalf of humanity. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to save his species. David took a deep breath and began. Esteemed counselors, assembled observers, I stand before you representing a species that is young by galactic standards. We have been part of this community for less than a standard year. We are still learning your customs, your technologies, your ways of conducting affairs across the stars. But there is one thing humans have learned well over our long history on Earth. the difference between justice and expediency. He paused, letting the translation fields catch up. Justice requires truth. It requires examining all evidence, questioning convenient conclusions, and having the courage to admit when powerful individuals may have made mistakes. Expediency, by contrast, requires only finding someone to blame and moving forward regardless of the facts. Counselor Dravik stirred on his throne. Ambassador, if you are suggesting, I am suggesting nothing, Counselor. I am stating facts. David pulled out the data crystal Telvin had given him. I have evidence that contradicts the official investigation's conclusions. Evidence that shows the environmental barrier failed not because of human exhalation, but because someone deliberately sabotaged it. The chamber erupted in noise. Species shouted, whistled, buzzed, and expressed shock in 100 different ways. Chief Counselor Zyler raised multiple tendrils, calling for order. Ambassador Cole, this is a serious accusation. What evidence do you claim to possess? Complete spectroscopic analysis of the barrier fragments, showing molecular disruption patterns consistent with directed energy weapon fire. David held up the crystal. Analysis performed by your own technical assessment division, but classified before it could be included in the official report. He loaded the crystal into the podium's interface. The chamber's central display activated, showing Telvin's detailed molecular analysis in formats that specialists threw out. The gallery could understand. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The holographic display showed molecular structures rotating in 3 dimensions, with highlighted sections indicating damage. Patterns that even non-specialists could see were inconsistent with chemical degradation. Murmurs spread through the gallery as various species technical experts began analyzing the data. David watched Counselor Dravik's rocky face, trying to read emotion and features. Designed by evolution for a completely different world, Chief Counselor Zeeler's tendrils flickered through several colors before settling into a deep purple that David's cultural briefings had identified as indicating serious displeasure. Ambassador Cole, where did you obtain this classified data? From someone within your own organization who believes truth matters more than political convenience, David replied. Someone who couldn't remain silent while an innocent species was condemned. Counselor Siren's crystalline body chimed with agitation. This is highly irregular. The Council's internal deliberations are protected. 417 beings are dead, David interrupted, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. Families have lost loved ones. And you want to talk about bureaucratic protocol? The irregular thing here isn't how I obtained evidence of the truth. The irregular thing is that evidence of the truth was classified in the first place. Counselor Dravik finally spoke, his voice resonating like grinding stone. The analysis you have presented is preliminary data that was excluded from the final report because it was deemed inconclusive by senior investigators. Inconclusive? David gestured at the display. The disruption pattern shows a precise point of impact with energy dispersion radiating outward in a spherical pattern. That's not chemical degradation, Counselor. That's a weapon strike. A new voice entered the discussion. From one of the gallery sections, a being David didn't recognize rose to speak. The translator identified them as Technical Specialist Moran from the Crystal Collective. Chief Counselor, if I may, I have reviewed the presented data, and Ambassador Cole's interpretation is correct. This damage pattern is absolutely consistent with directed energy weapon fire. Specifically, a molecular disruptor set to target polymer bonds. Another voice joined in, this one from a different section entirely. I concur with Specialist Moran's assessment. The spherical dispersion pattern is unmistakable. Then another and another. Technical experts from half a dozen different species, all confirming what Telvin's analysis had shown. David felt hope rising in his chest but kept his expression neutral. This was the moment Telvin had predicted other honest analysts finding courage to speak truth to power. Chief Counselor Zyler raised several tendrils for silence. Very well. Let us assume for the sake of discussion that the barrier was damaged by a weapon. This does not exonerate humanity. Perhaps one of your delegation members carried such a weapon and used it, either intentionally or accidentally. Our delegation was scanned 6 times before boarding station Kepler 442, David countered. We carried no weapons of any kind. The station's security logs will confirm this. Security logs can be altered, Counselor Dravik suggested. Then examine our people directly, David said. Every member of my delegation is still in this system aboard our ship. Subject them to the most thorough scans your technology allows. You won't find any trace of weapons or weapon residue. He was gambling now, betting that whoever had sabotaged the barrier wouldn't have been foolish enough to use human operatives who could be physically examined. It was a calculated risk, but he had few cards left to play. Chief Counselor Zyler's color shifted again, this time to a pale green that indicated thoughtful consideration. The Council will take your offer under consideration. However, there remains the question of how this weapon came to be used in Conference Chamber 7 at the precise moment your delegation was present. The timing suggests human involvement. David had been waiting for this argument. Or it suggests someone wanted it to appear as human involvement. Tell me, Chief Counselor, who authorized the maintenance work on that environmental barrier 2 days before our delegation arrived. The chamber went silent. David could feel thousands of eyes, in whatever form various species possessed them, focusing on this exchange. Station maintenance is a routine matter, Zyler said, but something in the Chief Counselor's tone suggested discomfort. Handled by administrative staff according to established protocols. But this specific maintenance wasn't routine, David pressed. The contractor, Viridian Systems Engineering, isn't on the station's approved vendor list. They were brought in through a special authorization code. He paused for effect. An authorization code belonging to Counselor Dravik. The explosion of reaction from the gallery made the earlier outburst seem quiet by comparison. Species throughout the chamber began shouting questions, demanding explanations, calling for Dravik to respond. The rocky counselor stood, his massive form radiating barely controlled fury. How dare you imply that I had anything to do with this tragedy? Dravik's voice boomed across the chamber. Yes, I authorized Viridian Systems to perform maintenance. They are a reputable contractor with whom the Stone Worlds Alliance has worked for centuries. There is nothing suspicious about routine maintenance authorization, except that Viridian Systems performed that maintenance incorrectly, David said. The barrier that failed had been weakened by substandard repair work. When the weapon strike occurred, the barrier couldn't withstand the stress. It shattered completely instead of sustaining minor damage. He pulled up another document on the display, this one from the public financial records that Rebecca had accessed. And coincidentally, Counselor Dravik holds significant financial interests in Viridian Systems. If their faulty work had been exposed as the cause of the disaster, both the company and the counselor would have faced severe consequences. Dravik took a threatening step forward. You accuse me of conspiracy? Of murdering 417 beings to protect my investments? I accuse you of authorizing faulty maintenance, and then participating in a cover-up when that maintenance contributed to a disaster, David said, standing his ground despite his racing heart. Whether you intended the deaths is a question for investigators. But your conflict of interest is obvious, and your push to blame humanity conveniently deflected attention from your own. Chief Counselor Zyler's tendrils were now a deep crimson, a color David had never seen before. This is an extremely serious accusation, Ambassador. Do you have proof of Counselor Dravik's involvement beyond financial connections and authorization of routine maintenance? David hesitated. This was the weakest point in his case. He had circumstantial evidence and reasonable suspicion, but no direct proof that Dravik had orchestrated the weapon attack or the cover-up. If he overreached now, he could undermine everything he had accomplished. I have proof that the official investigation was incomplete and that exculpatory evidence was suppressed, David said carefully. I have proof that the barrier failure was caused by a weapon, not human biology. I have proof that Counselor Dravik had conflicts of interest that should have required his recusal from judgment on this matter. What I don't have is proof of who fired the weapon or who ordered it fired. But that's exactly why humanity requested a full independent investigation in the first place. The chamber fell silent as David's words sank in. He had moved from defense to offense, turning the proceeding from humanity's trial into a referendum on the council's integrity. Counselor Siren spoke, her crystalline voice cutting through the silence. Chief Counselor, Ambassador Cole has raised legitimate questions about the investigation's completeness. I move that we suspend judgment on humanity pending a truly independent inquiry into all aspects of the Station Kepler 442 incident, including potential conflicts of interest among council members. Seconded, said another counselor. One of the members who had remained quiet throughout the earlier proceedings, Counselor Dravik's rocky features twisted into an expression David couldn't read. This is absurd. The human is deflecting blame by making wild accusations against a sitting counselor. We should proceed with judgment immediately and deal with his slander afterward. The human has presented technical evidence that contradicts our official findings, Counselor Siren countered. Evidence confirmed by multiple independent analysts in this very chamber. We cannot ignore that and maintain any credibility as an impartial governing body. The debate among the council members continued for nearly an hour, with arguments flying back and forth in languages and conceptual frameworks that the translation fields struggled to render into English. David stood at the podium, exhausted but unable to show weakness. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Finally, Chief Counselor Zyler called for order. The council will vote on Counselor Siren's motion to suspend judgment and authorize an independent investigation. All in favor? David counted the votes with held breath. 6 in favor. 4 opposed, including Dravik. 2 abstentions. The motion passes, Zyler announced. Judgment on humanity is suspended pending completion of an independent investigation to be conducted by a panel of technical experts from non-aligned species. Counselor Dravik, you are hereby recused from any further participation in matters related to Station Kepler 442, pending resolution of the conflict of interest questions. Dravik stood abruptly, his rocky form radiating fury. For a moment, David thought the counselor might physically attack him. Instead, Dravik turned and strode from the chamber, his footsteps echoing like distant thunder. Chief Counselor Zyler's attention returned to David. Ambassador Cole, you have bought your species time. Use it wisely. If the investigation confirms your theories, humanity will be cleared of all charges and granted formal apologies. If, however, the investigation determines that your accusations against Counselor Dravik were unfounded and made in bad faith, Earth will face consequences far beyond the original charges. Understood, Chief Counselor, David said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Humanity welcomes the truth, whatever form it takes. Then this session is adjourned until the investigation concludes. Zyler's tendrils pulsed once more. May we all have the wisdom to accept what truth reveals. The podium lowered, taking David back down to the waiting area. Rebecca rushed to meet him, her face showing a mixture of relief and anxiety. Sir, that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most reckless, she said, as guards escorted them back to the diplomatic quarters. Probably both, David admitted. Feeling the exhaustion hit him now that the immediate crisis had passed. But we're alive. Earth isn't condemned, and we have a chance to prove our innocence. I'll take that as a win. Back in the quarters, David collapsed into a chair while Rebecca reviewed the flood of messages that had arrived during the session. Most were from Earth, where the entire proceeding had been broadcast live and had apparently dominated every news channel on the planet. The Secretary General wants a full briefing, Rebecca said. Earth's media is calling you a hero. The opposition parties are calling you a reckless cowboy who nearly got humanity expelled from galactic civilization. Both probably have a point, David said. He stood and moved to the window, looking at the simulated image of Earth. Somewhere down there, 9 billion people were going about their lives, most of them blissfully unaware of how close they had come to isolation from the stars. His communication device chimed with a new message. This one was from Telvin, and it was brief. Well done, Ambassador. The truth has allies you haven't met yet. The investigation will vindicate humanity. Be patient and trust the process. David allowed himself a small smile. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had allies. And they had something else that humanity had always relied on throughout its history, the stubborn refusal to accept. In just as quietly, the galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't make good scapegoats. Independent investigation took 3 weeks to complete. 3 weeks during which David and his delegation remained confined to the diplomatic sector of the Council Station, unable to return to Earth, but also unable to participate in normal Council activities. It was a strange limbo, neither condemned nor fully cleared. David spent the time reviewing every scrap of information he could access about galactic politics, trying to understand the deeper currents that had led to humanity being targeted. What he discovered was both enlightening and disturbing. The Galactic Council maintained its authority through a careful balance of power among major species blocks. The Stone Worlds Alliance, which Dravik represented, had been losing influence for decades as younger civilizations developed new technologies that made the two alliance's traditional mining and resource extraction industries less valuable. Dravik and his political allies had been looking for ways to reassert their importance. Meanwhile, humanity's admission to the Council had upset calculations that some members had considered settled. Earth possessed nothing that made it strategically vital, no unique resources, no revolutionary technology, no massive military force. But humans had demonstrated an unexpected talent for forming alliances with minor species, offering diplomatic support and creative problem-solving in exchange for trade. Relationships and cultural exchanges. In 3 years since first contact, Earth had established friendly relations with 17 different species, most of them small powers that felt overlooked by the major blocks. It wasn't enough to shift the balance of power significantly, but it was enough to worry established players like the Stone Worlds Alliance. They saw us as a threat, David said to Rebecca as they reviewed the political analysis together. Not because we're powerful, but because we're good at making friends with species that the major powers have ignored. So the incident at Station Kepler 442 was what? An attempt to discredit us before we could build a real coalition. Rebecca frowned at the data. That seems like an extreme response. Unless they knew something we didn't, David mused. Unless they saw potential in humanity that we haven't even recognized yet. His speculation was interrupted by a message from Chief Counselor Zeeler requesting his presence in a private conference room. David went alone, as requested, and found himself in a modest chamber far removed from the Grand Council Hall. Zeeler waited there, tendrils pulsing with a soft amber color that David's cultural database identified as indicating serious but not hostile intent. Ambassador Cole, thank you for coming, Zeeler said. I wanted to speak with you privately before the investigation results are made public. David felt his stomach tighten. Has the panel reached conclusions? They have. And I thought you should hear them from me first, in a setting where we can speak candidly. Xyler's tendrils shifted, creating patterns in the air. The investigation confirms your theories completely. The environmental barrier was sabotaged using a molecular disruptor. The device was hidden in maintenance equipment left by Viridian. Systems and activated remotely when your delegation entered. Conference Chamber 7. The weapon was programmed to create what should have been a minor breach. Enough to cause evacuation and emergency repairs, but not catastrophic failure. But the faulty maintenance work made the barrier more fragile than the saboteurs expected, David said. Precisely. The combination of weakened structural integrity and the weapon strike caused complete failure rather than controlled damage. Dravik's cost-cutting in the maintenance contract literally set the stage for the disaster, even if he didn't specifically intend such extreme consequences. David felt vindication mixed with horror. He had been right, but being right meant that 417 beings had died because of political maneuvering and corporate greed. What about Dravik himself? Was he directly involved in the sabotage? Xyler's color shifted to something darker. The evidence suggests Dravik knew about the plan to create a minor incident that would be blamed on human biological incompatibility. He may not have ordered it directly, but he certainly didn't prevent it when he learned of it. The goal was to force humanity into accepting severe restrictions on participation in council affairs, effectively neutralizing your growing diplomatic influence. And the 417 beings who died? Were they considered acceptable collateral damage? David couldn't keep the anger from his voice. They were never supposed to die. The plan was for minor injuries at most, enough to justify restrictions, but not enough to trigger serious investigation. The incompetence of Dravik's chosen contractors turned what should have been a political embarrassment into a tragedy. Xyler's tendrils drooped in what David recognized as a gesture of sadness. This does not excuse the conspiracy, of course. Dravik and his co-conspirators will face justice. Who else was involved? 3 junior members of Dravik's staff, 2 executives from Viridian Systems, and a security contractor who installed and activated the weapon. All have been arrested. The investigation panel has recommended that Dravik be removed from the council and face criminal charges for negligent homicide and conspiracy. David absorbed this information, trying to process the implications. And humanity? Where does this leave us? Completely exonerated, Xyler said firmly. The council will issue formal apologies and offer compensation for the diplomatic damage done to Earth's reputation. There will also be an official acknowledgement that the rushed judgment against humanity violated the principles of due process we claim to uphold. That's it? An apology and compensation? David shook his head. Chief Counselor, my species was hours away from being condemned to isolation. We were blamed for deaths we didn't cause. Our children's delegation program was suspended. Human students were sent home from galactic universities. Earth-based companies lost contracts. The damage goes far beyond what compensation can address. Xyler's color shifted to deep purple again. What more would you have us do, Ambassador? David had been thinking about this question for 3 weeks. I want reforms. I want the Council to establish clear protocols for investigating incidents involving newer member species. I want mandatory recusal procedures for counselors with conflicts of interest. I want transparency requirements so that classified evidence can be reviewed by independent observers. And I want Earth to have a voice in drafting these reforms. The Chief Counselor was silent for a long moment. You ask for significant changes to how the Council operates. I ask for the changes that should have prevented this disaster in the first place, David countered. Chief Counselor, if Dravik could orchestrate something like this against humanity, what's to stop it from happening to the next species that makes the major powers uncomfortable? The system failed. Not just in this case, but in ways that allowed this case to be possible. That needs to be fixed. Xyler's tendrils rippled through several colors before settling into a soft blue. You are correct, of course. The system did fail. And it failed in ways that should concern all species, not just humanity. The chief counselor moved closer. I will support your reform proposals, Ambassador. But I want something in return. David tensed. What? I want Earth to take a more active role in council affairs. Your species has a perspective that many of us lack, the viewpoint of relative weakness dealing with entities far more powerful. As we integrate more developing civilizations into galactic society, we need that perspective to avoid future injustices. Xyler's tendrils gestured in a pattern that David's database identified as indicating respect. You fought for truth when it would have been easier to accept a convenient lie. That kind of integrity is valuable here. You want humanity on your side politically, David said, understanding the calculation. I want humanity to be engaged, period. Whether that means being on my side or challenging me when I'm wrong. Xyler's color brightened. The council needs voices that will speak truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You've proven you have such a voice. David considered the offer. Earth had entered galactic society, hoping to avoid major political entanglements, to simply learn and trade, and gradually build their place among the stars. But the station Kepler 442 incident had proven that staying neutral wasn't an option. If they didn't engage with galactic politics would still engage with them. I'll need to consult with Earth's government, David said. But I can tell you that humans generally believe in fighting for what's right, even when it's difficult. If the Council wants our active participation, we'll give it. On our terms, with our values intact. I wouldn't expect anything less, Xyler said. The formal announcement of the investigation results will be made in 6 hours. I wanted you to hear it first, and to have time to prepare your response. How you handle the next few days will shape Earth's relationship with the Council for decades to come. After leaving the meeting with Xyler, David returned to the diplomatic quarters and found Rebecca coordinating with Earth about the upcoming announcement. He briefed her on everything Xyler had said, and together they crafted a response strategy. We need to be gracious but firm, David said. Accept the apology, but make clear that we expect substantive changes, not just words. And if the Council resists reforms? Rebecca asked. Then we make noise. Lots of noise. We take our case to the galactic public, to the media, to every minor species that's ever felt overlooked by the major powers. We build a coalition for change. David smiled grimly. Humans are good at that kind of grassroots organizing. It's time the galaxy learned just how good. The formal announcement came exactly on schedule. The investigation panel presented their findings in the Grand Council chamber before a packed audience. The evidence was damning surveillance footage showing Viridian Systems employees installing the molecular disruptor. Communications logs between Dravik's staff and the conspirators. Financial records showing payments designed to look like legitimate contracts, but actually funding the sabotage operation. Counselor Dravik was not present, having been placed under house arrest pending criminal proceedings. His absence left a void on the council platform that seemed to symbolize the institution's failure. When the panel finished their presentation, Chief Counselor Xyler addressed the assembly. The council acknowledges that a grave injustice was done to humanity. We rushed to judgment based on incomplete evidence and failed to question conclusions that supported political convenience over truth. To Ambassador Cole and to all humans, we offer our profound apologies. The chief counselor paused, tendrils shifting through several colors. But apologies are insufficient. The system that allowed this injustice must be reformed. Therefore, the Council is establishing a special commission to review our investigative and judicial procedures. This commission will include representatives from developing civilizations who can provide perspective on how the Council's actions affect less powerful species. Ambassador Cole, we invite Earth to nominate a member to this commission. David stood at the speaker's podium, aware that billions of beings across the galaxy were watching this moment. On behalf of humanity and Earth, I accept the Council's apology and the invitation to participate in reform efforts. But I want to be clear about what we expect going forward. He pulled up a document on the central display. These are humanity's proposed principles for Council reform. They include mandatory transparency in investigations involving member species, strict conflict of interest rules for counselors, and appeals processes for species who believe they've been treated unjustly. We don't claim these proposals are perfect, but they're a starting point for meaningful change. David looked directly at the assembled counselors. The species represented in this chamber range from civilizations billions of years old to newcomers like humanity, who are still learning to navigate interstellar politics. But regardless of age or power, we all deserve to be treated with fairness and respect. That's not a radical idea. It's the foundation of any legitimate government. He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. What happened to Earth at Station Kepler 442 could happen to any species that makes powerful interests uncomfortable. The only way to prevent it is to build systems that prioritize truth over convenience and justice over political expediency. Humanity is willing to work toward those systems. The question is whether the Council is willing to do the hard work of reform. The chamber erupted in response. Some species expressed support. Others seemed uncertain. A few appeared openly hostile to the idea of humans lecturing the Council about governance. But no one could ignore the challenge David had laid down. Chief Counselor Zyler called for order. Ambassador Cole's proposals will be given full consideration by the Reform Commission. This Council commits to substantive change, not merely symbolic gestures. The session concluded with formal votes to strip Dravik of his council seat and to authorize criminal prosecution of all conspirators. It was a clear victory for justice, but David knew the real work was just beginning. Over the following days, David met with representatives from dozens of species, building support for the reform proposals. He discovered that many smaller civilizations had their own stories of being overlooked or marginalized by the Council's major powers. Earth's experience had given them a rallying point. "You put words to what many of us have felt for centuries," said Ambassador Lurix of the Kentari Collective, a species of aquatic beings who had struggled for recognition despite their advanced biotechnology. The Council operates on assumptions that favor the oldest and most powerful civilizations. Your reforms could create space for the rest of us. A coalition began to form, not officially aligned, but united by common interests in making the HFY Council more responsive to all members rather than just the major powers. It wasn't enough to shift the overall balance of power, but it was enough to make the reform proposals impossible to ignore. 3 months after the Station Kepler 442 incident, the Reform Commission presented its recommendations. They included most of humanity's proposed principles, with additions suggested by other species who had faced similar challenges. The Council voted to implement the reforms with only minor modifications, but it wasn't a perfect victory. The reforms had limitations and loopholes that would need to be addressed over time. But it was progress, and it established Earth as a voice for accountability in galactic governance. On the day the reforms were officially adopted, David stood once more in the observation deck where Telvin had first given him the evidence that started everything. The Veilarian appeared again, emerging from shadows with the same cautious manner. "Congratulations, Ambassador," Telvin said. "You achieved something many thought impossible. You made the Council reform itself." "We achieved it," David corrected. "Without your evidence, humanity would have been condemned. You took a tremendous risk." Telvin's mandibles clicked in. What David had learned was equivalent to a human shrug. It was the right thing to do, and it appears to have worked out well for both of us. I've been promoted to senior analyst, apparently as a reward for my thoroughness in investigating the incident. Even though you violated protocol by giving me classified data? Officially, I never gave you anything. The data appeared through unknown channels, possibly leaked by one of the conspirators trying to create confusion. At least, that's the story that allows the Council to save face. Telvin's compound eyes reflected the starlight outside. The truth is more complicated and more political than the official version, but that's always the case with institutions of power. David smiled. I'm learning that. Thank you, Telvin, for your courage and your integrity. Thank you for using the information wisely. Many species would have simply accepted exoneration and moved on. You demanded systemic change. That will benefit species you'll never meet on worlds you'll never visit. After Telvin left, David remained in the observation deck, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. 3 months ago, he had been a career diplomat, expecting a routine posting to the Galactic Council. Now he was helping reshape how that council operated, building coalitions across dozens of species, and positioning Earth as a voice for reform in galactic civilization. It wasn't the role he had expected, but it was the role humanity needed him to plow. Why his communicator chimed with a message from Earth. The Secretary General wanted to discuss next steps now that the reforms were in place. There was talk of expanding Earth's diplomatic corps, establishing permanent missions to key Council member worlds, maybe even hosting a major galactic conference on Earth itself. Humanity was no longer just a probationary member trying to avoid mistakes. They were becoming active participants in shaping galactic civilization's future. David smiled and headed back to the diplomatic quarters to prepare his recommendations. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just survive challenges, they used them as opportunities to build something better. And that, he reflected, might be humanity's greatest strength of all. 6 months after the reforms were implemented, Ambassador David Cole stood in a very different venue than the Grand Council chamber. This was Conference Hall 7 on Station Kepler 442, rebuilt after the disaster, and now serving as the site for the first major test of the new investigative protocols. The hall was smaller than the main council chamber, but still impressive, with walls that displayed real-time images from across the galaxy. Representatives from 43 different species filled the seats, all of them interested in seeing how the reformed system would handle its first significant case. The case in question involved a trade dispute between the Macarian Consortium and the Delthori Union, two mid-sized civilizations that had accused each other of violating commerce agreements. Under the old system, the Council would have simply sided with whichever party had more political influence. Under the new protocols, an independent investigation team had spent 3 months examining evidence from both sides. Before making recommendations, David wasn't directly involved in the case, but he was present as Earth's representative on the Reform Oversight Committee. His role was to ensure the new procedures were being followed correctly and to identify any problems that needed addressing. The lead investigator, a being called Solon from a neutral species with no ties to either party, presented findings that surprised almost everyone in the hall. After thorough review, we find that both the Macarian Consortium and the Delthori Union violated their trade agreements, but in different ways and for different reasons. Neither party is entirely innocent, nor entirely guilty. Solon displayed evidence showing that the Macarians had indeed manipulated shipping routes to favor their own merchants, as the Delthori claimed. But the Delthori had responded by imposing tariffs that violated the free trade zones established in their agreement. Both sides had acted in technically illegal ways while believing they were justified by the other's behavior. The investigation team recommends that both parties acknowledge their violations, pay modest fines to a neutral arbitration fund, and renegotiate their trade agreement with council mediation to address the underlying issues that led to these disputes. Solon concluded. The Macarian representative looked unhappy, but not outraged. The Delthori representative seemed similarly dissatisfied, yet accepting. It was, David reflected, probably a good sign. When both sides in a dispute felt the judgment was somewhat unfair to them, it usually meant the judgment was actually balanced. After the session concluded, Rebecca joined David in the hall's observation area. That went better than expected, she said. Both parties accepted the findings without major protest, because they both knew the investigation was thorough and impartial, David replied. Under the old system, they would have spent years fighting through council politics, trying to gather allies and undermine each other. This way, they get a clear answer based on evidence and can move forward. Do you think the reforms will last? Rebecca asked. Or will the major powers find ways around them once the spotlight moves on? David considered the question carefully. Some of the major powers will definitely try to circumvent the reforms when it suits them. That's inevitable. But now there's a framework for challenging those attempts, and there are enough minor species watching for violations that it will be hard to get away with blatant abuses. He gestured at the hall around them. The real test isn't whether the system is perfect. It's whether it's better than what came before. And I think we can honestly say it is. His communicator chimed with a priority message from Chief Counselor Xyler requesting a private meeting. David made his way to a small conference room where Xyler waited, tendrils pulsing with colors that suggested both satisfaction and concern. Ambassador Cole, thank you for coming, Xyler said. I wanted to discuss a delicate matter with you before it becomes public. David settled into a seat designed for human physiology. What's the matter, Chief Counselor? We've received an application for council membership from the Javari Concordat, a developing civilization in the outer spiral arm. Their technology level is roughly equivalent to where humanity was about 50 years ago. They've achieved rudimentary FDL capability and have established colonies on 3 worlds in their home system. That sounds like a typical application, David said. What makes it delicate? Xyler's colors shifted to something darker. The Javari are facing a unique challenge. Their biology is silicon-based rather than carbon-based, which means their environmental requirements are incompatible with most council facilities. Additionally, their thought processes operate on timescales very different from carbon-based life. What seems like a brief conversation to us might take them days to complete. David was beginning to see where this was going. And you're worried that bringing them into the council will create practical problems that could lead to the same kind of misunderstandings that nearly destroyed Earth's membership. Precisely. The technical challenges are solvable with enough resources and planning. But the cultural adjustment will be significant for both sides. The Javari process information and make decisions very differently from most council species. There will be frustrations, miscommunications, possibly serious incidents as both sides learn to work together. Xyler's tendrils formed a pattern that David had learned indicated a request for assistance. I'm asking Earth to take a leadership role in the Javari integration process. Your species has recent experience with being the newcomer trying to navigate council politics. You understand the challenges they'll face better than civilizations that joined thousands of years ago. David felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. You want us to mentor them? Help them avoid the mistakes we made? More than that, I want you to help design an integration protocol that we can use for all developing civilizations going forward. The Council has been accepting new members for millennia, but we've never formalized the process. We simply expected newcomers to adapt to our ways with minimal assistance. That approach works poorly, as your experience demonstrated. The Chief Counselor moved closer, color shifting through several shades. The reforms you pushed for addressed how we investigate incidents and resolve disputes. But they didn't address the deeper problem of how we welcome new species into our civilization. That's the next frontier of reform, and I believe Earth is uniquely positioned to lead that effort. David thought about the implications. Leading the Javari integration would require significant resources and attention from Earth's diplomatic corps. It would also put humanity in a highly visible role, which meant any failures would be magnified. But it would also establish Earth as a key player in one of the Council's most important functions. "I'll need to consult with my government," David said. "But I can tell you my initial reaction is positive. Humanity would be honored to help the Javari and to contribute to developing better integration protocols." "I had hoped you'd say that," Sadler said. "The Javari representatives are arriving in 3 weeks. That gives you time to prepare and to assemble a team that can work with them effectively." After the meeting, David contacted Earth and briefed the Secretary General on Zyler's proposal. The response was enthusiastic. Earth's leadership saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's value to galactic civilization in a concrete, positive way. "We'll assign our best people to the project," the Secretary General said. "This is exactly the kind of role we wanted Earth to play, not as followers or antagonists, but as contributors who make the galaxy better for everyone." Over the next 3 weeks, David worked with experts from multiple fields to prepare for the Javari arrival. Xenobiologists studied their silicon-based chemistry. Linguists developed communication protocols that could bridge the gap between their slow thought processes and carbon-based species' rapid speech. Engineers designed facilities that could accommodate their environmental needs. When the Javari delegation finally arrived, David was waiting in a specially prepared conference room. The Javari themselves were unlike any beings he had encountered before, crystalline structures that seemed to grow and reshape themselves in response to their thoughts, communicating through vibrations in their crystalline matrices that took several minutes to form complete sentences. The lead Javari representative, who identified herself through a name that translated roughly as Rezona, Ents of Deep Stone, spent nearly an hour formulating her first greeting. David waited patiently, understanding that rushing would be both rude and counterproductive. "We are grateful for Earth's willingness to guide us," Resonance finally communicated. "We know our differences from most Council species will create challenges. Having an advocate who understands what it means to be different gives us hope." David smiled, even though the Javari probably couldn't interpret the expression. "Earth knows what it's like to be underestimated and misunderstood. We'll do everything we can to help you avoid the mistakes we made and to build bridges between your civilization and the rest of the Council." The integration process took months of careful work. David's team developed protocols for managing communication delays, created shared spaces where silicon-based and carbon-based beings could interact safely, and mediated dozens of minor misunderstandings before they could escalate into serious problems. The most significant challenge came when a Javari engineer accidentally contaminated a water-based environment during a facility tour, not understanding that the silicon compounds they shed naturally were toxic to certain aquatic species. The incident could have sparked the kind of crisis that Earth had faced at Station Kepler-442. Instead, David immediately activated the new investigation protocols. An independent team examined the incident, determined it was an honest mistake resulting from insufficient briefing about environmental hazards, and recommended better training procedures rather than assigning blame. The aquatic species whose environment was contaminated accepted the explanation, and the Javari representative offered formal apologies. "This is how the system should work," David explained to Resonance afterward. "Mistakes will happen when different species try to work together. The key is having processes that discover truth fix problems, and prevent recurrence rather than just looking for someone to punish. We appreciate this approach, Resonance communicated slowly. In our own history, we often responded to accidents with severe penalties, believing that harsh consequences would prevent future errors. But we've learned that fear of punishment simply makes people hide mistakes rather than addressing them. The insight struck David as profound. Here was a species with completely different biology, operating on radically different timescales, arriving at the same conclusions about justice and accountability that Earth had fought to establish in the Council's reforms. As the Javari integration progressed successfully, other developing civilizations began requesting Earth's assistance with their own Council applications. David found himself coordinating with multiple species, each bringing unique challenges and opportunities. A year after the Station Kepler 442 incident, David stood once again in the Grand Council chamber for a formal ceremony. The Javari Concordat was being welcomed as a full council member, the first species to complete integration under the new protocols that Earth had helped design. Chief Counselor Zyler addressed the assembly, tendrils bright with satisfaction. The successful integration of the Javari Concordat demonstrates that our reforms are working not just in theory, but in practice. We have learned to be more patient, more understanding, and more willing to adapt our systems to accommodate diversity rather than expecting everyone to conform to established norms. The Chief Counselor's attention turned to David. Much of this success is due to Earth's leadership. Ambassador Cole and his team have shown us that being a newer member of this council isn't a weakness. It's a perspective that brings fresh insights to old problems. Humanity has transformed from a species we nearly condemned in error to a civilization that helps us become better than we were. The chamber filled with expressions of approval from hundreds of species. David felt pride, but also humility. Earth hadn't set out to reform galactic civilization. They had simply refused to accept injustice and had worked to build something better from the crisis they faced. After the ceremony, David found a quiet moment in the observation deck where his journey had taken so many crucial turns. He looked out at the stars, thinking about how far humanity had come in such a short time. His communicator chimed with a message from Emma Rodriguez, the child whose biological response had inadvertently started this entire chain of events. She was 10 now, and her message was filled with excitement about a school project studying the Javari and their silicon-based biochemistry. Ambassador Cole, my teacher says that because of what happened to me, the Council learned to be more careful with children from all species. She says something bad became something good. Is that true? David composed his reply carefully. Emma, what happened to you should never have happened. The adults involved made serious mistakes, and people died because of those mistakes. But you're right that something good came from it, not because of the tragedy, but because people chose to learn from it and build better systems. That's what humans do best. We take our failures and use them to create better futures. He sent the message and smiled. That was really what the past year had been about. Not just reforming the Council or helping new species integrate, but demonstrating humanity's core strength, the ability to adapt, learn, and improve no matter how difficult the circumstances. Rebecca joined him at the viewport. Secretary General just sent new assignments. We're being asked to expand the integration program to help 5 more developing civilizations over the next 2 years. 5 more? David raised his eyebrows. That's ambitious. It's also necessary. Word has spread that Earth actually helps newcomers instead of just tolerating them. Species are specifically requesting our involvement in their integration processes. Rebecca showed him the list. These civilizations represent different biology types, political systems, and cultural backgrounds. Each one will present unique challenges. David studied the list, feeling both excitement and trepidation. We'll need more staff, bigger budgets, probably a permanent Earth mission dedicated solely to integration support, all of which Earth is prepared to provide. The government sees this as our niche in galactic civilization, being the species that bridges gaps and welcomes newcomers. Rebecca smiled. It's actually kind of perfect for humans. We're not the strongest or most advanced, but we're good at making connections and solving problems creatively. Then let's do it, David said. Let's show the galaxy that Earth's greatest contribution isn't our technology or our military power. It's our commitment to making sure everyone has a fair chance to succeed. Over the following months, David watched Earth's role in galactic civilization continue to evolve. Human diplomats became known for their advocacy on behalf of smaller species. Human engineers developed a reputation for creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Human cultural exchanges brought new perspectives that enriched galactic art and philosophy. But perhaps most importantly, Earth became known as the species that had faced injustice and responded not with bitterness or isolation, but with determination to reform the system, so others wouldn't suffer the same way. It wasn't the path anyone had expected when humans first reached the stars. But it was, David reflected, very much a human path, using intelligence to overcome disadvantages, building coalitions based on shared values rather than raw power, refusing to accept that things had to remain the way they had always been. The galaxy had tried to condemn humanity for crimes they didn't commit. In fighting back against that injustice, Earth had helped reshape galactic civilization into something more fair and more inclusive. It was a story that would be told for generations. Across hundreds of worlds, the story of how a young species, faced with extinction, chose to fight not just for their own survival, but for a better future for everyone. And it all began with one ambassador refusing to accept a convenient lie and insisting on the truth, no matter the cost. David looked out at the stars one more time, then turned back to his work. There were 5 more civilizations waiting for Earth's help in navigating the complex world of galactic politics. There were reforms that needed monitoring and refinement. There was always more work to be done. But for the first time since stepping into that council chamber a year ago, David felt certain about humanity's place among the stars. They belonged here, not because they were the strongest or most advanced, but because they brought something valuable that the galaxy needed. They brought hope that things could change, that justice could triumph over convenience, that even the smallest voice could matter if it spoke truth with courage, and that, more than any technology or territory, was humanity's real contribution to galactic civilization. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for a future where Earth and all the species they helped integrate could thrive together, building a civilization that honored diversity, demanded fairness, and welcomed all who sought to contribute. It was a future worth fighting for, and humanity would never stop fighting for. It. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.